Hey everyone, and welcome to our second week of classes. We are continuing on with our discussion of Chapter 1. This time we're moving on to descriptive and correlational research methods. I'm talking to you today from the white void that is my office, but you can see it's looking a little bit nicer. I've removed some of the clutter from the table behind me, and I've added 2 plants. So, feels like home. So this week we're talking all about how scientists ask and answer questions. Interpreting data is difficult, and generally speaking, people aren't very good at it. We're going to talk a little bit about how scientists interpret data, how they design experiments, what they do with the data when they collect it, and what kind of conclusions they can draw. Let's start off with an example that's kind of topical about how people often aren't so good at interpreting data. Somewhat recently, there's a movement of people who are protesting 5G towers, specifically under the sort of misguided theory, and I use the term theory colloquially and not scientifically here, that 5G towers are causing the coronavirus. You might wonder how could people come up with something so strange? Why would people think that? Let's look a little bit at some of the data that these people are working with and talk about how maybe they misinterpreted that. Oh, and this is my favorite bit of the protest, the have you heard of science sign. Well, yes, I'm not sure everyone in this protest has, but yeah, we'll get to that. So I have a couple of maps here. These are at least a couple weeks out of date, so they're not the latest maps. But here we have on the bottom a depiction of clustering of coronavirus cases in the United States, early cases. And on the top, we have a map depicting locations of 5G cell towers. So the more dense the coloring is, the more 5G towers are in a given location. So we have population infected with coronavirus and density of 5G cell towers. Now, you can take a look at both of these maps and you can see that these things seem to overlap, right? Dark areas here with lots of 5G towers are also areas with lots of cases of coronavirus. Before I go to the next slide, sort of take a minute and think about this. What kind of connection can you draw from this data? Does anything stand out to you or seem problematic? A lot of people might look at this and say, oh, well, these things are related, right? There's lots of towers, lots of cases, that's that. Well, maybe that's not. Okay, now I'm going to show you a third map. So up here we have our 5G tower map, and at the bottom we have a different map, which also lines up very nicely with both this map of 5G towers as well as the previous map that we saw of coronavirus cases. It might not surprise you to learn that this map is actually depicting population density. And if you take a step back and think about it, population density explains things much better, right? Perhaps it's not that the 5G towers, in fact, it certainly isn't the 5G towers that are causing coronavirus cases, but perhaps dense population centers have a greater need of these towers, and infection rates are higher in dense urban areas. So the best explanation for this is population density, right? It's a common sort of misconception that things that are related must be related through cause, right? But we know that correlation does not equal causation. You've probably heard that, and we're going to talk a little bit more about exactly what correlational research is, as well as other research approaches, and why correlation does not infer causality. Oh, and I can't leave this alone without putting in some really good YouTube comments. Misinformation here. Oh man, it's convenient that coronavirus has put an end to all these protests because 5G is really what it's all about. Harmful technology that is a weapon, definitely turned against the people. And here, doctors say that 5G towers cause the coronavirus pandemic. They don't say that. Okay, we've talked a little bit about the wrong way to do this. Let's talk a bit more about the right way to do it. Let's start off by talking about the scientific method by defining some key terms. A theory is an explanation that organizes observations and predicts behaviors or events. So you take information, observations, etc., and you organize those into a sort of framework. This is not just a mere speculation or a hunch, as you might sort of colloquially use the term theory. In terms of the scientific method, a theory is this organization of observations. So an example of a theory might be something like the amygdala is necessary to express fear. So this particular brain region is necessary to perform this function. Hypothesis is a testable prediction that's often implied by a theory. This must be verifiable, so it has to be falsifiable. It has to be something that you can test. So in this example, you might hypothesize that damage to the amygdala would prevent the expression of fear. So you could test that prediction, right? You could take a subject and cause damage to the amygdala if you're doing animal work, or perhaps you could find a clinical population that has damaged amygdalas and test them with their ability to express fear. So it's something that you can ask a question about and find an answer. It is falsifiable, it is testable. So let's talk through another example. So there might be a theory, a collection of observations that people have that sleep seems to boost memory. So that might lead you to hypothesize that when people are sleep deprived, people remember less from the day before. So perhaps their memory for something they learned the day before is impaired if they are deprived of sleep. So that hypothesis will lead to the research and observation stage here. We might give study material to people before they've either had a good night's sleep or a shortened night's sleep, then test their memory, right? So we're testing that hypothesis. The prediction is that if people don't have as much sleep, they're not going to learn as much or not going to remember as well as those who have a good night's sleep. So that's a testable hypothesis that we're testing here in this stage. So once that's done, we have a new observation, a new data point to integrate into our theory. So say, for example, we do find that our hypothesis was correct, right? That on our subjects that were deprived of sleep, they don't do quite as well as those who were able to sleep well. So now we can integrate that into our theory. We can look at observations that perhaps we or others have made and sort of put our observation in that context. This might lead to further confirmation of the theory that yes, indeed, we have more evidence to support that theory, that sleeping boosts memory. We might reject the theory if, for example, our data doesn't fit with that. We might say, hey, we found something that doesn't fit well here. The theory is either no good, or perhaps we need to revise that theory, that only under certain conditions, or perhaps only certain populations, right? We might have to add some caveats or some more nuance to the existing theory, right? So in this way, science is sort of self-correcting, right? As new observations are collected and integrated with existing theories, those theories change and become more accurate and precise. Okay, let's talk through that in a slightly different way, and sort of a four-step method, right? The first is to formulate a testable hypothesis, right? Using the example from the previous slide, sleep-deprived people remember less than non-sleep-deprived people. So this hypothesis is derived from observations either we have made or by reading and understanding the observations that others have made previously. Next, we design the study and collect the data, right? Perhaps we do something like this. Higher self-reported hours of sleep will predict better memory. So if we take a population of people, ask them how much are they sleeping, assess their ability to remember, and maybe a novel list of information, we can sort of have a prediction there and see what happens. Analyze the data and draw conclusions. We'll talk in a later unit about how exactly scientists are doing this, but that is the next step. Then you report the findings. Make a poster, write a paper, give a talk, go out, talk to other people about your research, get it out there. Peer review, not YouTube, right? Real scientific knowledge is advanced through peer-reviewed channels. What that means is other scientists who have a similar knowledge base as you will evaluate your work and decide if it is worthy of merit, right? So when I do my work in the lab, I write up my paper, I send it out to a journal for publication. That journal sends it out to other scientists who would be able to understand my work. Then they will evaluate it. You know, they might say, well, okay, you say this, but you don't really provide that evidence, or there's a problem with your control group over here. You really need to fix that before you can say that that's the case. So there's an exhaustive review process where this sort of paper goes back and forth before it is published and regarded as, worthy of consideration by the field. I'm emphasizing this, the peer review, not YouTube, because there's a lot of misinformation now, especially with the current viral pandemic that we have. A lot of, so-called experts can get a platform on YouTube or Facebook or wherever and say whatever they feel like. But it's really, really important to evaluate what you're looking at. Is the information that they are telling you based on real science? If you trace their sources back, do you find it in a proper peer-reviewed journal, or are they just saying whatever they want? Okay, let's talk about defining variables. Science relies upon empirical evidence, meaning that everything must be verifiable and objective. A variable is a factor that can vary in ways that can be observed, measured, and verified. It's important to have operational definitions for your variables. A precise description of how the variable in a study will be manipulated or measured. So when we're designing a study, creating variables or measuring these variables, you have to be extremely precise. So for example, you might have the question, if I change study habits, can I help students do better in school? There's a lot of things here that need to be defined to make this a good experiment that others can benefit from. For example, what is better? Does better mean that the student feels better about the performance? Should you ask them how they felt like they did on the test? Is better how they're performing in that class? What sort of grade did they receive? Perhaps better isn't anything to do with the class at all. Maybe you're looking at employment outcomes. Do students do better getting a job after they graduate with your new method? What do you mean by better, right? And that's an important question. It must be very, very explicitly defined to be useful.